All right. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Hallie Warner. I'm the Chief of Staff at Adam Hergenrother Companies, and we are going to be diving into the session, Learn to Think and Lead Like a CEO, no matter your title. This one is particularly important to me and meaningful to me because in our assistant roles, and I think the latest research I want to say was like 160 different titles for the assistant position. We don't always have the clout or the credibility based on our titles alone. I'm really thankful that all of the work with summits like this, the Global Skills Matrix, with the work that Lucy's doing, and a lot of other really amazing advocates for the administrative professionals and for executive support professionals, that I believe that perception is changing. But we do have to contend with that to a certain degree, that our title isn't CEO or COO, and therefore doesn't automatically give us that credibility, whether it's deserved or not. So because of that, as assistants, and you'll hear me say force multipliers from time to time, as executive assistants, executive support professionals, or as force multipliers, we need to learn how to lead through influence and learn to think and lead like our CEOs and like our leaders. And sometimes it can be a little bit harder when we don't have that title to fall back on. But we are up to the challenge. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. So the three most important things that I believe a leader and a force multiplier must do are these three things. They must cast the vision. And of course, our leaders are casting the vision for the organization. Where are we going? What does the next 3 to 5 years look like? What does the next 20 years look like? But we, as their assistants and force multipliers, can walk with them hand in hand to help them do that, whether it's prepping materials or helping to draft memos or proofreading presentations, or even just having conversations that help emphasize the leader's vision. That is part of what we do as their strategic partner. The second most important thing is that our leaders are organizing the business efficiently and effectively and providing focus, clarity, and direction along the way. It's one thing to have this big, huge vision, but it's another to be able to actually point the team member in the right direction. And what do we need to get done this quarter, this year? And again, that's where the assistants can really come into play, working hand in hand with their executive to make sure that projects are prioritized, that people are being held accountable, that reports are being submitted on the right days, that the right information is getting back to our executives so that they can make, number three, make the best decisions and make quality decisions. That's incredibly important for our leaders to be doing on a daily basis. And there's a lot we as assistants can do to help facilitate that process. Again, whether that's making sure the right information gets to the right people, whether that means research is prepped, just making sure the right people are in the right room and that the cadence of communication is flowing so that there's not a roadblock or any sort of holdup in making decisions or getting the right people to be available, or even clearing your executive's calendar so he's available or she's available to make sure that the decision is made that needs to be made. Now, why am I sharing all of this? Because it's really important to know where your executive is focusing so that you too can begin to start thinking and aligning your thought process and your daily activities to enhance your ability to think and lead like your CEO. And here's the fact of the matter. It's not just to think and lead like your CEO, it's how to think and lead like a CEO. We are leaders too in our profession as executive support professionals. And we are also leading. We're just doing different pieces of the job that our executive is doing, but we too need to show up every day as a leader to be the most effective strategic partner and for our executive and employee for our organization. So if we know what these three things are, we can then begin to align our thinking with our leaders. So number one, of course, is understanding our executives' goals and vision. Again, not just the company's vision. That's a great place to start. We want to know where the organization is going 5, 10 years from now. What's the legacy plan? But even more than that, we also want to make sure we're very clear and very aware of what our executive's goal is. Because they may have, let's say you're working directly with a VP, they may have specific career goals to move into the C-suite. Well, what can you do to help facilitate that process? Do you make sure that they are attending a networking event? Do you know that there's an upcoming training that they should attend? Do you just know that they need to regularly be calling some of their network so that they can position themselves for that next opportunity? That's what I believe being a great partner and a great force multiplier is for our executives. Also, that can be so much as knowing what their goals are about their time. They may be looking to not save some time, but to eliminate their time in the office. So where can you help them save 5 hours in the office that they're spending that, whether it's with external stakeholders or whether that's with their family? But knowing what those goals are helps you start to align your thinking with your leaders, again, so that the decisions you're making help amplify your executive's goals. Knowing what your leader knows is critical. And there's a couple of really easy ways you can go about doing this. I say they're simple. Sometimes they're not so easy because it depends on how much access your executive is giving you, but it never hurts to ask, and it never hurts to show them what the benefits are and to explain the benefits of giving you this particular type of access. So one of the very first things I did in my career when I started working as an executive assistant with my principal, Adam, about, it's almost been 12 years at this point, is I just dove in to learning everything he was learning. So whenever I could, I was attending the same classes he was attending. I, with his permission, would listen in on phone calls or listen in on meetings. If I didn't have time to attend those meetings, a lot of our meetings with our executives are recorded. Can you go back and listen to a recording so you can start to study how your executive speaks or thinks or makes a decision or even just communicates? Or answers questions. I also made sure I was reading what my executive was reading, whether that was books or articles or subscribing to different blogs or in magazines, listening to the same podcasts he was listening to. And the reason I did this was because I wanted to whatever he was inputting, I wanted to make sure I was inputting that as well. So if he was reading a book about leadership or about coaching or about starting a SaaS company, I wanted to also have that baseline of knowledge because I knew I could be a more effective force multiplier for him if I too had that similar type of input because here's the thing, at a certain place in your career, it's not as relevant to be, learning how to use Excel. Like that's a great skill and it's good to know that in your role, or calendar management. Those are incredible skills. But when you really start to think more about elevating your role, we have to stop thinking about just the technical skills and more about really it's about teaching yourself how to think and teaching yourself how to make decisions. That's what I think great leadership is, and then how to communicate that. So studying and learning the same things that your executive does is really important. Another piece I did was with his email. So I would make sure, of course, most of us, I hope, are looking at our executives' emails every day, making sure we're doing our triage, but it's not just about the doing. It's about taking the doing one step further and really reading and trying to understand what you're seeing and who the players are. So I would, of course, be reading my executive's inbox, but beyond that, I also made sure I read all of his sent emails because I wanted to see who is it important for him to be speaking to that day. What is he saying to them? What questions is he asking? How does he ask questions? And in addition to that, I would also read the trash folder because I wanted to know what wasn't as important to him. What did he think? It doesn't matter. This is irrelevant, or he maybe forwarded it to somebody else. It was a way for me to learn the ins and outs of quite honestly, it was his thought process. And you can learn that over time. But some of the things I just shared with you are ways that you can fast track that. In addition to that is understanding both your own and your leader's natural behavioral style. I love taking behavioral assessments like the DISC profile, the Enneagram, Myers-Briggs, 16 personalities, Clifton Strengths, I think is what it's called. Principles, Ray Dalio has one's called Principles that's out. And the key to these is not to read them and assume that that is who you are. It's not a report card, it's data. So while a lot of behavior and personality assessments are really accurate, I never like to take a look at that report and just assume that that is who I am, nor do I assume that that is who my executive or team member is. It's information. And so when you can take that and start going into self-inquiry mode or into curiosity mode when you're thinking about your executive, again, it only makes you a better leader and helps you start thinking more and more like a CEO. Curiosity is a great quality for a leader. So when you're looking at yourself, think about where is this report accurate? Where is it not accurate? Is this actually how I show up? Is this really how I communicate? Is this how I operate under stress? Where are my strengths, and where can I use them even more? And doing the same for your executive. And so the best part, I think, about taking behavioral assessments is actually getting together with your leader and use them as talking points for learning more about each other, where you align, where you don't, where you may have challenges in the future, or where you've had challenges in the past. And you can start pinpointing a little bit like, oh, this is why we maybe butted heads over this particular decision, because your behaviors are different. There's nothing right or wrong about it. It's just great information and place to get really curious to learn more about yourself and your leader. Aligning with your executive's thinking goes with communication. So making sure you're really clear on how they like to communicate. And I don't just mean like text or email versus phone. Those are great places to start, but also do they prefer to communicate verbally, because they actually they're an external processor and they like to talk through issues, or they like to be able to, they know they come across better when they speak rather than write. That's great for you to know, so you can help facilitate those opportunities. It's also great to know that about yourself too. How do they prefer to have long, in-depth conversations in the afternoon versus the morning? When is their energy best? This helps you, of course, enhance your executive's leadership, but also your own, when you're able to have this kind of knowledge and can align your thinking in the way that you are scheduling their days or managing their life, or managing really the flow of the business. It really helps to understand how your leader thinks, acts, and communicates. And then, of course, powerful questions. Like, this is my favorite. I said that leadership is a huge part of leadership. Great leadership is being really curious. And that means mastering the art of asking powerful questions. I think being able to do that really takes you from a great assistant who can handle all of the day-to-day and manage all of the doing. But when you start moving into asking questions, it just starts to open your world up and your career up to learning more. Different opportunities may arise. You become really a great advocate and advisor to your executive when you can ask great questions. So we're going to go over some of my favorite questions that I like to ask with my executive to drive clarity, prioritization, and execution. And if you remember, one of the top 3 things that we can do, or that leaders and force multipliers do in their role, number 2 was to provide focus, clarity, and direction for the team. And one of the ways that we as force multipliers and executive support professionals can do that is by asking really, really great questions. I don't know, I was talking to somebody recently, and they were mentioning how they weren't necessarily the subject matter expert when they were in a big product meeting. They're the executive assistant to the CPO, and that felt a little unsure about that. And I said, that's amazing. You are going to be the individual in the room who is going to ask questions, and sometimes asking an incredibly good question rather than having a good answer actually shifts the dynamic of the conversation and brings a completely different perspective to the conversation that may not have existed there before. So that's really your superpower as a force multiplier. You don't need to be the subject matter expert on marketing or product or sales, but what you can become really great at is asking good questions, facilitating conversations, following up on those conversations, and really force multiplying your leader's leadership. So here are a couple of my favorites. So one of the first things I do when I have a new idea with my executive, or, our executives probably have a lot of great ideas, especially if they're an entrepreneur or a visionary. And oftentimes if we're sitting down to have a meeting about a new project, I will often ask, is this just a venting conversation? Do you just need to externally process? Or do you actually want me to ask questions and help us formulate a solution and move things forward? That's a really good place to start, because your executive may not have anyone else to talk to and just needs to process through how they're feeling or how they're thinking, or maybe they just have a new idea and they want to see if there's any viability to it. So just getting really clear in the beginning, knowing if this is a question conversation or is this just, you need to just kind of talk and you want me to listen. My natural inclination is always to dive in and ask a lot of questions. So for me, it's really important to make sure I'm clear on what kind of conversation we're having before we get started. Assuming that it's a questions conversation, here's some other ones that I may ask. When my executive has a new idea or wants to start a new initiative or a new company or a new project. So I'll ask, does this idea or project help serve our mission, vision, or our big why? And why is that important to you and the company now? It might not be, right? It's good to know, is this something that can wait? Is essentially what that question is. And is it in alignment with that vision, right? Number one of the important things for leaders is the vision. So is this project or idea in alignment with our vision? Is there just kind of like a nice to do, or maybe it's a passion project that we can table for 12 months? So who's going to be leading this project? Guarantee, but very often it is not going to be the executive or yourself. So it's somebody else in the organization who needs to lead that project. And then who is responsible for the implementation? Does that mean that you need to help facilitate that conversation, set up meetings? Do you need to make a hire before that project or new initiative can go forward? Who is this going to impact? And do we need other people's input before we move forward? And if so, who is that? And then you go and you follow up and you set those meetings, get those people into the conversation, help prep the meeting and the agenda. Because it's not always just you, and it's not necessarily an isolated conversation or project. There's other people who it is going to affect. I always like to ask, what's the desired outcome and what is the result that we're looking for, especially if your executive has like a big idea and maybe a couple of other ancillary ideas that go along with that one. I'd like to ask, what's the outcome? Like, what are we really looking for here? Most of the time I can figure out the rest, and so can you. You can figure out who needs to be involved, which departments you need to bring in, but you really need to understand what is the end goal. Is it to launch a nonprofit? Is it to be able to give your team, all of your team members a 5% raise in the next 12 months? What is the thing that they want done? And then figuring out how to get it done, it becomes much easier when you're crystal clear on what it is that they actually want to do. Another way of asking that is, what problem are we trying to solve? Is that the real problem, or is there a bigger problem here that we are ignoring? So let's say the problem is raises, the example I just gave. So we say, oh, we just want to give everyone a 5% raise. Well, so the problem we're trying to solve, let's say, is morale. Is giving a 5% raise going to solve that problem? Maybe. It probably will solve it for a little while, but is there a bigger underlying issue? Maybe there's a cultural issue, or maybe there's an individual who is actually, causing turmoil within the organization, and that's really the bigger issue. So it's really important to keep digging down to make sure that you're solving the problem, not the surface problem, but actually the deeper issue. And then, of course, we always want to have a deadline. So when do you want this completed by? And a lot of times our executives are going to say, I want this next week or tomorrow. And it doesn't hurt to ask why. Why now? Does it have to happen this year? Does it have to happen this week? Again, going back to, does it align with the vision? Is it something that aligned with our quarterly objective? If not, maybe you can adjust it. Similarly, so here's the thing, you also don't have to ask all of these questions in a meeting, but these are just different ones you can draw upon depending on the conversation you're having. Where does the project fit in based on our annual initiatives? Here's the big one. Do we need to reset our expectations or stop working on something else in order to make this project happen? I think oftentimes we just keep piling things on top of each other, and there's only so many hours in a day. So what do we need to say no to in order to say yes to this project? And if the answer is we don't want to say no to anything, well, then we have to revisit, is this project really a priority right now? Number 9 is really more of a question that you ask yourself. So when I said, well, like, what's the desired outcome? What results are you looking for? When you get really, really clear on that, then the how of you're going to get it done is something you're going to go work on your own. Most of the time, you might bring a team together. How are we going to get this done? Who do I need to bring in? What's the project management plan? Who do I need to schedule meetings with? And then you can go back to your executive and say, okay, well, here's how we're going to get it done. Does this work? They're usually going to say yes with maybe a couple of tweaks. But you're taking a lot of it off of their plate so that they can do what they do best and you can help force multiply it. And of course, one of my favorite questions to ask in a lot of situations is what are we missing? What did we not consider here? Or who are we not considering? Because there's generally something both of you are forgetting, but simply by asking that question or even thinking about it for 24 hours, you might come up with, oh, you know what, we did not talk to finance about this, and we need to make sure that we connect with them before we move forward on anything. I like to keep, like, if you hear really great questions, I highly recommend just keeping like a notebook or Evernote or note somewhere of great questions to ask, whether it's in meetings, whether it's just a great coaching question. Mastering the art of questions is really such an incredible leadership skill. Again, you don't have to be the smartest person in the room. You don't have to be the most knowledgeable on any particular subject, but if you can be really, really amazing at asking questions, it can change the entire trajectory of your organization. And that in and of itself is massive influential leadership. So I do recommend keeping a list of questions going and looking at them from time to time. And just the more you look at them, the more you'll know when you can bring them into different situations. Okay, and then so that's answering, asking great questions, but what about when somebody asks you a question? I read this in an article not too long ago, and as we know, the majority of senior executives are direct, they move really quickly, they want to drive the agenda of whatever the meeting is, and they usually have questions that they want to ask because as leaders, they probably have done a lot of this work and know that asking questions helps get to the root of the issue quickly. So when you're working with senior executives, the best thing that you can do, and this is also something that you'll want to practice too as you increase your leadership more and more, is the best thing that you can do when you're working with a leader or a senior executive is to just answer their question. So a lot of times in meetings, and you'll see this with other team members too, I highly encourage you to watch this. And this is something else you can do, is help coach other leadership team members to do this, to just answer the question. But a lot of times, let's say your executive asks, how did we do, how were the sales this month? Did we hit our sales goal? And let's say the sales goal was 10 new clients. So the sales exec might say, well, you know, we had a really difficult time making all of our phone calls. We lost an employee, so we didn't quite hit our goal. We got 6 new clients, but we're working, you know, and there's this whole story about why they didn't meet the goal. The senior executive just wants you to answer the question. So did we hit our sales goal this quarter or this month? And the answer is yes or no. And that's really all they're really looking for. That's a great way to answer the question. Now, a better way to answer the question is leaving a little bit of additional information in case the executive has follow-up questions, because most likely they have a series of 3 or 4 questions in their head of information they want. And aside from that, they're not really interested in the stories, they're not interested in the details, they just want the information, they want to move on. But leaving a little thread that the executive can pull is a great way to answer questions with your senior leadership team or with your executive. So instead of just saying yes or no to that question, you could say, let's say you didn't hit the goal, and you can say, no, we acquired 7 new clients instead of 10. However, we have 2 who will be signing next week, and we'll be making, and we have 2 more who are signing, you know, the following week, right? So you just give them a little bit more information so they can say, okay, great. Well, how much was that? Were those 2 additional contracts for? Maybe that's all they want to know, and then they're done. So long story short, knowing how to ask great questions is really key to thinking and leading like a CEO. Answering questions directly and answering the question first rather than telling a story first is also a great way to start leading and thinking like a CEO. And as executive support professionals and executive assistants and all of the other titles that fall into that category, we are so used to doing. And not that leading isn't doing either, but bear with me. There is a difference with being in the weeds and being in the business and doing things every day, right? We've got a laundry list of to-dos that we have to take care of, and we're doing. When we want to start leading and thinking more and more like a CEO, we have to stop worrying so much all of the time. Not that we won't, but it's less about the worrying about checking things off and getting things done than it is about taking a step back and saying, are these things that I'm working on really making a big impact? Are they moving the needle of the business? And are they really making an impact on my executive and the organization? And where can I start to leverage? Can I delegate? What can I say yes and no to? And who else can I influence in the organization to work on my own leadership skills? And how do I gain more knowledge of the organization as a whole? It doesn't mean that you're going to stop doing, it just means that you're going to be expanding your role rather than just staying on your to-do list or your checklist. Here's a couple of things that you can do to move from doing to leading. So whenever possible, again, here's that curiosity thing, work on zooming out from the to-do and just question, where does this fit into the overall context of the organization? Why am I doing this thing? How does this task impact the organization or my executive as a whole? And working on really zooming out and developing a broader understanding of the business or the project or the person that you're working with, so that you have a bigger context of the work that you're doing and how it fits into the overall scope of things. That's kind of a good first step in moving from just doing to leading. And again, I'm not saying your position changes at all. It's just a mindset shift. You could still be the executive assistant to, your CEO and your COO. And it's just a mindset. You're still doing a lot of the same things. You're still tackling their calendar and their list of to-dos and your list of projects, but it's a mindset shift. It's working on zooming out and understanding the context. That also includes developing your business acumen, knowing how the business makes money, where does your company fit into the competition, into the overall industry, learning if your particular division or your executive is really big on personal development or has a passion project in their philanthropic work, understanding what that looks like and how you can help force multiply their agenda there. It also means honing your critical thinking and your strategic thinking skills. I guarantee your execution and implementation skills are probably better than anybody's, and your logistical skills, but where can you start again, taking it from the doing and the organizing and planning into thinking again, more strategically, more long-term, and going from I do it to we do it or they do it. And that's that fourth point there. When you start moving into more of a leadership mindset, again, it might not be right away, but it's important to stop thinking about just, okay, new project comes through, I got to get it done. Not necessarily. Maybe there's somebody else on your team you can team up with. Maybe there's a committee you can draw upon. Maybe it's time to get an intern. That's starting to think from, maybe there's you can work on getting outsourcing a project. Instead of just having something land on your desk and automatically thinking about how you're going to do it, starting to shift your mindset and thinking about how can we do it and figuring out who the we is. And then eventually, if it ends up on your not to do list on the things that you don't want to be doing long-term, perhaps there's an opportunity for eventually they to do it. Maybe it is your next hire. Maybe it's an intern, so that you're not always the one doing, but rather doing the things that you're best skilled at and are going to make the most impact for the organization because you are uniquely positioned to do it, and then leading through others to get the rest of the work done. And then from doing to leading, it's really important to let go of the outcome and to make sure that you are speaking up about what it is you want and need in your in your career, in your role. And when I say letting go of the outcome, it doesn't mean that you don't care about what happens. It simply means that no matter what happens, you are going to be okay. You are going to, whether you're not at that job anymore, you're still going to find it. You'll find another job. It's being confident and knowing that you can handle whatever comes your way, and that regardless of the outcome, you will be okay because you are whole and complete inside. And so it doesn't ever hurt to speak up when you come from that place of letting go of that outcome. Okay, so here's a couple of quick ways to demonstrate that strategic thinking. It's one of those things we talk about a lot, but how do you actually do it? So one of it is never being indifferent and always making sure that you're bringing some sort of viewpoint to the table. I just think that's really key as a leader, but particularly as force multipliers. That's what I was talking about. You can bring great questions to the table. You can bring your ideas and opinion to the table. It doesn't mean just to be being confrontational or contrarian for the sake of being a contrarian, but it just means bringing up a different perspective. Have we considered this? Being curious about what's going on and thinking about it from a different perspective and sharing that. And hand in hand with that is having the courage to challenge others to think differently. And then also having the courage to initiate and drive your own ideas. So let's say you do bring an interesting idea to the table. Having the courage to say, I'm going to give it a shot. I'm going to try it. Are you guys good with that? And if the team is great with that, then taking initiative and going and doing it and not just assuming that someone else will take it. But when you really start showing, I'm going to take this strategic idea, I'm going to go give it a shot, I'm going to go try implementing it. And I'll come back to you with results. It may work, it may not, but that's actually less of the issue. It's more about whether or not you've actually taken the initiative to go give it a try. And showing that you can take that initiative to initiate change and bring about change in your organization. And again, I'm not talking about necessarily changing the entire compensation structure of your organization. Although if you did that, that'd probably be a great thing. But perhaps there's a way you can initiate some change and training of the administrative professionals in your organization. Perhaps there's some strategic change you can make on PTO policies, or maybe there's some influence you can have on how company meetings are run and who's invited to them, or how they're distributed throughout the organization. There's a lot you can do when you start thinking outside of the box, thinking from not just from the doing, but from the leading. And a lot of it comes from that confidence, which comes from letting go of the outcome and knowing that you can figure anything out. Even if you don't have the answer, you will be able to figure out the answer, having confidence in that. So developing confidence and building your executive presence comes with a couple of key things. And I have additional resources on all of them, so I'll go through them fairly quickly. Or if you have questions, you can ask afterwards. But making sure you are clear on your vision. We talked about the company vision and your executive's vision, but how about your vision? Are you clear on your personal and professional vision for your life and your career? We talked about studying behavior. That can help you build confidence because it does help you under all being self-aware and reflecting on yourself and studying your behavior does build confidence. The more you know about yourself, the more you understand how you're going to show up in different situations, what may stress you out, where you may need to over prepare because you might not be as confident, but by being prepared and practicing, those will eventually lead to more and more confidence over time. When you're able to manage your emotions, that not only helps with your confidence, but with your executive presence. I'm sure you know some leaders in your organization who are able to stay very neutral throughout, no matter if it's the most amazing thing that's happening or whether it is there's something really difficult going on in your organization. It doesn't mean that you're a robot and you have no emotions. It just means that you're able to stay neutral and make clear decisions from a state where you're not either on a high or a low based on what might be going on internally. Having really great communication skills, orally and written, is going to help boost your confidence and your executive presence. Everything's about communication. So learning how to communicate in ways that the stakeholders can receive that information is really key, and it takes practice and it takes research or taking a writing course. All of that stuff will help build your confidence over time. Taking on new challenges, we talked about that with strategic thinking, and new projects that you try out and fail forward and know that you failed and it's okay. That does help build confidence. It certainly helps build executive presence when you can take the lead on a project, because not everyone will do that. Owning your successes and failures is really important. I guarantee that the majority of you are great at owning your mistakes or owning up to the fact that you did make a mistake or that something didn't work out. But I want to encourage you all to also be owning your successes. And again, think of the leaders in your organization. I don't think many of them, brush it off when, a leader may acknowledge their contribution, or I'm sure they're not afraid to speak up and say, no, I led to this project and the team did a really great job. All I'm saying is stay humble, but make sure you are also owning those successes that you have, because that can lead to more visibility and then to more opportunity over time. Of course, we talked about questions. Listening and asking great questions is so important. And then leading yourself first is the key. If I could say there's a key, the key to all of it is leading yourself first. And I'll talk about what that means. So thinking like a CEO and leading like a CEO, regardless of your title, is a sequential process. It does not happen overnight, but it does start with a commitment to your personal and professional growth. And that starts with leading yourself first. So what leading yourself first means is doing what you say. You're making commitments to yourself and keeping them. I mean, that's the simplest way to say it. It means having a growth plan for yourself, whether that's personal or professional. And then when you make those commitments, it means showing up and doing the work in order to continue to grow. So here are some ways that you can work on leading yourself first. Having a personal and professional vision, like we talked about, but also a plan. Like, what books are you planning on reading? What training are you attending? You're obviously attending this training, which is amazing. So are there any other ones that you have scheduled out for the rest of the year? Are you willing and are you planning on taking on any new responsibilities or new tasks or new projects? That, like we mentioned about confidence and executive presence, will pretty much automatically help you grow, especially if it's slightly uncomfortable. How are you going to get outside your comfort zone? Again, is it doing a training? Is it doing your first webinar? Is it taking on the lead of a committee? Is it putting your foot down and telling your executive that you need to manage their calendar and their email? That can be incredibly uncomfortable, but it's going to help you grow, and it's certainly going to help your executive grow too. Perhaps you need a coach or a mentor or a personal trainer. Do you plan on teaching others? Teaching others is probably one of the best ways to learn. You just absorb the information differently when you're learning it. If you go with the intention that you're going to go teach it afterwards. Do you need to say no more? This is a big one. Knowing if you're really clear on your vision for your personal and professional life and you have a plan, it's much, much easier to say no to things that do not align with with where you want to go in your life and your career. So one of the biggest ways to lead yourself first is by saying no. Are you living your truth in alignment with your goals? I just think that is so important, and it's worth questioning and really being honest with yourself and taking the time and some space to get honest with yourself, and try to block out the noise of what other people are telling you or what society is saying about how you should live. You only have this one life that I'm aware of. So are you living in alignment with what you want out of life? There's a lot of ways to get to where we want. So, and I want to say, I mean, the opportunities really are endless as long as you know what it is that you want and what will make you happy. And then what are some of your daily success habits? So a lot of people have a morning routine. Some people have a midday routine or an evening routine. Regardless of when you do it, are there things that you do consistently to make sure that you're working on yourself? Journaling, exercise, eating well, drinking water, meditation, breathing exercises, prayer, whatever it is for you. Is it something that fuels you, helps you grow, and helps you stay in that alignment and in that neutral state? Because from that state, when you're leading yourself first, you're only going to become a better leader over time. Thank you all so much for joining, and I know we'll have some questions, so let's get started.